I have to give a shout out to the Toronto Star. They're getting pretty crisp at their headlines. I mean, more than 300 Canadians filing for bankruptcy each day as insolvency filings hit 4-year high. Pretty juicy. Now, what's happening here is that the headline's pretty catchy. My friend Doug is the one in this picture that was interviewed by the Toronto Star. And I decided to reach out to him and basically talk about insolvency, bankruptcy, and how this is going to impact residential real estate and if it will. We spoke about 18 months ago in January of 2023, where we talked about the state of the economy at the time and where things are headed. We made some predictions. So we're going to go over in this video, we're going to talk about the past, the predictions, what he's been up to, and the trends he's seeing unfold in the insolvency space as we speak. First of all, what caught my attention is the Toronto Star article, more than 300 Canadians filing for bankruptcy each day. But before we get into that, I noticed that you put together a very interesting documentary, Debtasized, right? I watched that with my wife last night. Looks like you have 66,000 views, which is pretty impressive. So I wanted to start with that because I actually learned quite a bit from there. Some things I knew, some things I completely had no idea, especially about the history of credit. So I guess, how did the idea of the documentary come about?
Well, one of our goals, I mean, obviously, I'm a business person. You're a business person. I mean, we're both CPAs. I mean, we have business backgrounds. And so obviously I want my business to do well and make money and all the rest of it. However, I also want people to know what's going on. I think education is a big part of it. And so obviously I do, podcasts and videos and get quoted in the newspaper and all that kind of stuff. But we thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to do something a bit more long form that would explain kind of where we're at? Because all we see when we walk out the door is whatever we see. We don't see the history. We don't know how it all came about. So we started thinking about how could we do that, and we came up with this idea of the documentary Debtasized. And meaning debt is ingrained everywhere in our culture. How many people do you know that go out and pay cash for a car? It's not a thing, right? I mean, I get a better deal if I lease it or if I finance it. How many people do you know go out and pay cash for a house? You would know better than me. The answer is, well, I guess if you're selling your old house and you're rich, but the vast majority of people, no, it's a mortgage. And in fact, the big discussion today is, well, how can young people buy houses when they can't even qualify for a mortgage? 100 years ago, the question was, can I get enough lumber together and build a house? Like debt wasn't even thought about. And you think of something like a credit card. Okay, well, they've always been there, they've always existed. No, they haven't. It's a relatively new thing. And again, do you actually think about using anything other than a credit card to buy something? It doesn't even occur to you. And in fact, why is it called a credit card? Shouldn't it be called a debt card? Isn't that
Yeah.
what it is? Every time you use it, you go into debt. Now, hopefully at the end of the month, you pay it off and maybe you get your rewards and it's all great. But how would the world be different if we called it a debt card instead of a credit card? If every time you went to the store or shopped online, they said, please enter your debt card for the amount of debt you want, we wouldn't do it. And so that was kind of the thought process behind the documentary. And as you know, you've watched it, we kind of walk through the history of those different forms of debt. And we're not moralizing and saying, oh, you should never have debt. And we're not saying that. We're saying you should understand it. And
You,
that was the point of putting together that documentary.
I found it super fascinating because obviously I don't remember a time where credit cards weren't a thing. Like I'm not familiar with such a time, but what I found very interesting is how I guess credit became the norm. Is I guess I think it was with mattresses or something or sewing machines where you would actually go and buy it. You would start the installment plan, but you wouldn't actually receive the good until you've paid it off. So you could start the payment plan for 6 months, pay it off, and then you get it. So I found that interesting and how everything has flipped since. And now it's like you can literally, I'm obsessed with cars. So like I go on car websites like where you can buy modifications and parts. You can finance now like $300 parts for
Mm-hmm.
like $15 a week. And it just goes back hand in hand. When they introduce credit, And when you had longer amortizations, how you guys charted out how house sizes became bigger,
Mhm.
cars became more expensive. It was always very interesting to me. And, the whole debate with leasing versus owning, we can go down that path. I'm not going to. One thing, because as a car person, I have to, if I was buying cars brand new, I would be losing my shirt. I'd be broke. Who knows, right? I'm allergic to depreciation. I've never bought a brand new car. I don't think I ever will. But I still lose money on them because, but that's just the cost of doing business. But yeah, cars, trucks, buying a truck, an $80,000 truck, people are always, looking at the guy with the BMW or the Benz, but you're seeing a lot more brand new F-150s and things of that nature. And they're very expensive trucks. And that to me always, it's a head scratcher because I understand the utility, but it's a very expensive toy to have. You probably see this a lot more than me.
We do. And the reason is when you go into the car place, they don't say it's $100,000. They say it's, $432 every 2 weeks. And you go,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, I can afford $432. We never stop to do the math and go, okay, it's an 8-year car loan, multiply it out. The value of the vehicle is this, and I'm paying a higher number than that. And would you still buy that vehicle? I mean, I'm the same as you. I drive a 2011 Honda Accord. Now, I did buy it new, which was obviously more than a decade ago. And I don't have a loan on it because it's that old, obviously. And I don't care if it gets a scratch on it because it's so old. Now, at some point, I guess I will have to replace it and get another car. But if I do, and if I choose to finance it, I will do the math first and go, okay, so how much is it actually costing me? And I think if we did that, then perhaps our decisions would be different. Here's the whole key to this. The whole reason we did the documentary, the whole reason we're having this discussion. I think you should be the boss, or whoever it is that's watching us. You be the boss. When you go into the car place, when you go into the store, you're the one who makes the decision, not someone else. So don't let the salesperson convince you to do something you're not willing to do it. You talk about financing car parts. Well, you can finance everything. You go to
It's wild.
the shoe store and buy now, pay later. And there's 4 or 5 different apps that will do that. And it's $100 pair of shoes while you can pay for it in 3 installments. You know, you pay some today, some in 2 weeks, some in 4 weeks, some in 6, whatever it is. Okay. And there's no interest on that. It's the same as if you pay cash. So what's the downside? Sounds good, right? Well, I guess I can buy 2 pairs of shoes then instead of one.
It's
And
wild. It's a little psychological warfare that's going on with consumerism and everything, but it's very interesting. I'm curious, how did you market this documentary? Like, did you have a specific way you were marketing, or like, how did you get the visibility?
we pretty much just put it out there. Um, we advertise it on our social media channels and things like that. But it did catch on because it's something a little different that nobody's ever kind of explained it. I mean, obviously, I am a licensed insolvency trustee. I'm in the bankruptcy and consumer insolvency business, but the documentary isn't selling anything. It's purely to be informative. And I think that's why it kind of, through word of mouth, it got around and, continues to grow.
Good. Well, you know what? I think the documentary is a good tool for people. I have some tactical advice. I'll tell you how I try to keep myself out of trouble financially. And I think so far I've done a pretty good job. Mind you, I have done a lot of stupid financial things, but for the most part, I have avoided the big ones, right? One thing I do, and I don't know if you're aware of this website, it's called Mr. Money Mustache. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if you know it. Okay. My brother-in-law, and shout out to him, he introduced me, he told me about this guy maybe 10 years ago. Every single time I wanted to buy something expensive, or I started, maybe I need to upgrade this or upgrade that. The only thing I would do is I would go to this guy's blog. For whatever reason, his writing resonated so well with me that I'm like, you know what? He would buy me literally 3 months of time where I'm like, I'm good. I don't need to do it. And I would just keep delaying things. And obviously, if some things I would just give in, I'd really want them and whatever, I'd buy them. But yeah, that was kind of the tactical advice. But I know for you, because I hear you loud and clear, and you probably tell people the exact same thing, spend less and this and that, and don't finance things and don't buy that truck. But I'm assuming most of the time it falls on deaf ears. Do you have any tactical wisdom you can share that maybe would help people in terms of how to think about this?
Well, my advice in all aspects of life is to cheat. Cheat. That's my advice. Cheat. So you come to me and you say, "Oh, I gotta lose some weight." Okay, so what am I going to tell you? You got to go on a diet. You got to use your willpower. There's no such thing as willpower. That's not a thing. I don't have that. So my advice would be, well, all those crappy foods that are going to make you fat, get them out of your house. Just fill your fridge up with stuff that isn't going to make you fat. I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't know if it should be carnivore. I don't know. But if you remove the bad stuff, then you can't get into trouble with it. You want to exercise. I'm going to go to the gym every day. No, you're not. Now, maybe you are, but most people, that's pretty hard. Okay, well, what can I do? How can I cheat? Well, here's what you can do. Get off the bus 2 stops before your house and walk. Walk 2 stops to get on the bus. Park your car at the end of the parking lot. I mean, those are all cheats, right? Well, with money, it's the same thing. So how can I not spend more than I want to? Well, the first thing I would do is never have any money.
That's
Okay,
pretty
how do I
good.
do that? Well, okay, so my paycheck, I get paid, every 2 weeks. That's how it works. Okay, so every 2 weeks, what I'm going to do is get rid of all my money. How do I do that? Well, I've got a phone bill. You probably have a phone bill too. It's $100 a month or whatever it is for your cell phone or your home, whatever it is. Okay, so the bill is due on the 24th of every month. Well, I don't get paid on the 24th of every month. So what am I going to do? I'm going to every 2 weeks, I'm going to send $50 to the phone company. I don't care what day it is, every $50, $50, $50. And I'm going to do that with everything. Whatever bills I've got, I'm just going to pay them or pay half of them every 2 weeks when I get my paycheck. So at the end of payday, the only money that will be left in my account is the money that I'm going to need for the next 2 weeks because I got to go to the grocery store. I got to put gas in my car. I got to fill up my Presto card, whatever it is. But the rest of the money is gone. Now, if you're in a position where you've actually got more money than you need to get you through the next 2 weeks, fantastic. That's called savings. Put that in your TFSA. Put it in a separate savings account. Put it in Bitcoin. I don't care where you put it. But if you see it, everyone's going to go, oh, he's telling you should buy Bitcoin. Okay, I'm using analogies here, people. If you see it on your banking app that there's money in your bank account, it's tempting to spend it. If you have a $20 bill in your pocket, it's tempting to spend it. But if you put the money in your TFSA, okay, it's not in your bank account anymore. And if your TFSA is at a separate bank than where you bank, well, then it's not on your banking app at your bank. So the money is gone. So I think the overall concept is make it easy for yourself. Cheat wherever you can, get rid of your money. And of course, if you actually do that, if you actually paid your phone bill, half the phone bill every 2 weeks, you'd be making 26 payments in a year, but you only need to make 24. So a year from now, you'd have overpaid your cell phone bill by a month. You saved money and you didn't even know it. Wouldn't it be great for the phone company to be calling you up and saying, hey, dude, you've overpaid us? Oh, great. So every December, I don't have to pay my phone bill because I've overpaid it. So now I got extra money for Christmas. I didn't even have to think about saving for it or whatever. So that would be my cheat. And I think the other thing that is very important to acknowledge here, some people, in fact, a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck. And it's not their fault. You know what the world is like out there. How much does a pound of bacon cost today versus 2 years ago? How much does a house cost? How much is everything is up. And for a lot of people, their wages have not gone up as much as their expenses have. So as a result, they're tight. And that's just the way it is. And it's easy to say, well, I guess you should get a better job. Yeah, that'd be great. How am I going to do that? Be great if you just, downsized your house by a half. Well, kind of hard with my spouse and two kids and a dog and a cat, and I got to be in the school district. I mean, it's not as simple as that. So for some people out there, in fact, for a lot of people out there, it's tough. And so all you can do is whatever you can. It's pretty much as simple as that.
One thing I always, people scoff at, the general advice is like, don't buy that cup of coffee because, what's that going to amount to? But the way I look at that personally is that the savings from the coffee are irrelevant to me. It's the muscle and the discipline of not actually going through with that purchase, which ultimately builds up to hopefully more things that you're not going to buy. But anyway, I think that's pretty good. What I like about what you just said is that it actually caters to the mindset of everybody living on a payment plan, right? Everybody's shopping was the biweekly payment or the monthly payment, and you're actually giving them a solution for that mindset. If you're in that mindset already, you're giving them something with the prepayment of the phone bill where you're kind of normalizing or immediately taking that money out so they're not getting tricked where they have less money at the end of the month. So that's interesting. I've never thought about it like that. But so that's good, and I appreciate that. Now, what I want to do is, because we don't have all that time, I'm gonna go through my notes because I did go through the last time we spoke, and I'm gonna bring up some stats, and then I'm gonna see what you think is happening based on the last 18 months and how things have evolved. So for the last 19 years, insolvency levels were increased during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And then leading up to 2020, before COVID, we also had a steady increase in insolvency. So I remember that from your graphs. At the time, the household savings were about 5%. And then they started slipping in 2015, going into 2020. Economy was stable. I'm curious, in that 5-year period, what happened? Was there some sort of a change that happened that we didn't see? Why did ultimately household savings start trending down?
So savings, and this is again, if you read the definition on the Statistics Canada website, you and I think of savings as the money that's in our bank account. No, savings is the difference between in and out. So
Okay.
if you have more coming in than's going out, that's what they count as savings. So what you said is exactly right. The savings rate in Canada has been dropping for, I don't know, 30 years. Why? Your question is why? Well, because if you think back to, 3, 4, 5 years ago, when interest rates were really low, why would I save money? What's the point? I don't need to have money in a savings account earning 0% when I've got a line of credit that I can borrow on that's only charging me 3 or 4%. So there was zero incentive to save. It was just spend the money, spend the money, spend the money. And then, of course, the events of March of 2020 happened. I won't say the word because I don't want you to get, kicked off YouTube or anything if I say the word, but everything got locked down, which meant you couldn't spend money like you were before. You couldn't go on vacation, supply chain issues, couldn't buy anything, but you were stuck at home anyways. You weren't going out for dinner, whatever. All you could do was order stuff to your house. You just couldn't spend as much money as you could before. And you were worried about the future because it looked like the world was going to end. So when things get tough, we batten down the hatches, better save money because I might need it for tomorrow. So as a result, the savings rate spiked way up. It went from like 0% to, I don't know, over 20%, whatever the numbers were. But then things started to loosen up again. And of course, since then, the savings rate has been dropping. Now, the stats published by the government of Canada are always in arrears. So as we record this, the most recent stats are from like 2 or 3 or 4 months ago. But what I assume will continue to happen is the savings rate will continue to drop and we'll get back down to close to nothing again, which is where we were sort of 5 years ago. And it's just inevitable. It's not good. I would be happier if people had savings, but we now have the combination of higher interest rates, and I happen to believe we're in a recession. I don't know if anyone else agrees with me on that, but definitely costs are higher. So I need more of my paycheck to live. Therefore, I've got less for savings.
Makes sense. So I know when we spoke 18 months ago, I believe business for you obviously was quiet because everybody had that stimulus money and all that stuff. So obviously in the last 18 months, I'm just wondering, I guess, how, obviously, I know how things have changed, but in the last 18 months, when was there a specific point in time where things noticeably started changing, or has it been a gradual, the lag has been working its way through? And where do you see it going, really?
Yeah, you're exactly right. The lag has been working its way through, and that the word lag is like a very important word. We should do 4 hours on that one day. So you're right. The insolvency rate was increasing, increasing, increasing right up until February of 2020, and then boom, kind of dropped off a cliff because the reason I file a consumer proposal or go bankrupt, obviously I've got too much debt, but it's also because I don't want to get sued and have my wages garnished. Well, if I'm not working, they can't garnish my wages. Plus, of course, the courts were closed, so nobody could sue me anyways. So there was a period of time there for the balance of 2020 and into 2021 where, don't need to go bankrupt. Don't need to file a proposal. But then once we got to 2022, things started to open up. Then there was the gradual increase, and it's been gradually increasing since then, so that now, by the summer of 2024, the insolvency rate, the number of personal insolvencies being filed is now higher than it was in 2019. So if you were to draw the chart going back 20 or 30 years, it's I mean, other than the 2008-9 spike and credit crisis and everything, the line is pretty much, up and to the right. A bunch of glitches in between, but that trend has continued. And if you were to plot the total credit card balances in Canada for the last 20 years, you'd see exactly the same thing. Up, 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 up. Now there was the big deleveraging in 2020, but we're right back up onto the line and off we go. And so your question about where we're going to go, it's going to keep going up
And it seems
because
like it's going to be accelerating relative to.
yes, I think that's true. I think that's true. The Obviously the unemployment rate now is higher than it's been for quite some time. And even though inflation is notionally going down, it doesn't mean prices are going down. It just means they're not going up as fast. And you mentioned the word lag. That is key to understanding everything that's going on. You go to the store, you buy a bag of chocolate chip cookies, you eat it. You feel great. Well, you're going to probably puke because you ate a whole bag, but you feel great, like boom. But if you were to,
I eat the whole box. I'm one of
you
those.
do, and
Oh,
I've
yeah.
I've done the same actually.
I buy it for my kids. I give them
I know
two, and
for
then
the
I eat
kids, for the
for the
kids,
kids.
and they never get to see it.
No.
So, but if you did that every day for 3 years, you'd be very sick, and so you don't feel the effects immediately. So in 2020, you're right, the federal government ran a $360 billion deficit, and they were giving checks to people, checks to businesses. I mean, everyone was getting money. It was great, fantastic, and there was no inflation. So look, it's fantastic. Modern monetary theory works. It's wonderful. Well, you go 18 months forward and a totally different story. There was a 6 months period there from around September of 2022 into the January, February of 2023 when the inflation rate on food was over 10%. It was 2 years after everything happened. Well, because there's that time lag. Now, the deleveraging that's happening, the inflation coming down, again, that's a time lag thing. But now we're getting close to the bottom of that. And so I agree with you. I think we're going to see accelerating personal insolvencies because of interest rates and because of high debt levels and because of low cash flow. It's a combination of all those things.
So we're gonna have to dust the cobwebs off of your homeowner's bankruptcy index, because the most common question I get all the time, every single day I'm talking to anybody is how's the market, right? And I can answer it with data, but irrelevant. I really want to get into the weeds of sentiment, right? And I think sentiment comes from the people you see it because that the sentiment. I do feel that the Toronto real estate market is driven mostly on sentiment. That's how I feel about it. So that's why it's very interesting for me to look at things outside of just, what's happening in real estate. So at the peak, 30% of your clients were homeowners, and this is '08 and '09, right? So this is how many people were filing for insolvency back then. That was the peak. So in my notes I have here, since 2015, less and less homeowners have needed your help because of massive equity appreciation in their homes. And now I believe less than 5% of homeowners have been in a dire situation, generally speaking. So less than 5% of the people that are calling you are homeowners. I want to get your thoughts, kind of like where are things today? I'm assuming things are probably still similar, but would
Yes,
you?
and
Oh,
yeah, and you're
yeah,
exactly right. So the and you're talking about the Hoyes-Michaelis Homeowners Bankruptcy Index, which is the percentage of our clients who own a home at the time they file a bankruptcy or consumer proposal. And there were many periods in the past, like you said, where that ratio was around a third. And the reason was, well, if I own a house that's worth $200,000, and this has actually happened in history, I'm not making numbers up here, and the mortgage was 190. Okay, there's 10,000 of equity, but really with real estate commission, there's nothing there. So you could still file a bankruptcy or consumer proposal, wasn't a big deal. Well, of course, when the prices spiked way up, even if you paid, the top dollar for your house 2 years earlier, you paid $1 million for it. Well, it's worth $1.4 million today. So it was almost impossible not to have equity in a house. So as a result, and in fact, it was August of 2022, first time in the 25-year history of our firm, that the homeowners bankruptcy index hit zero. We did not have one single client that month who owned a home at the time they filed. Never happened before, hasn't happened since. Over the last 2 or 3 months, June, July, August of 2024, we've been running in that 5 to 6% range, which is still historically very low compared to the 30% ranges we've seen in the past. And again, why is that? Well, because of the time lag, right? If if you bought a house at the absolute peak, which would have been, when was that? 2022?
February
Is that
22, yeah, February
February
20.
2022? So if you bought that house at the absolute peak, well, I guess if you sell it today, you're going to get less for it. But if you bought that house, took out a 5-year mortgage, well, you haven't sold it yet. So even though it's gone down, it doesn't matter. You haven't even refinanced it yet if you got a 5-year mortgage. Now, obviously, some people are refinancing and they're getting into trouble, and we can talk about that. But the equity is still there. So if you go to the peak in February 2022 and you look at house prices today, and obviously I understand everything's different. Are we looking at condos, single family, Toronto, out west, whatever? But what is the drop since the peak,
Call it,
roughly?
I don't know, between 10 to 20%, let's
That's what
call
I
it, to
would
be
say.
safe.
Somewhere in the 10 to 20% range. Okay, well, that's only the people who bought it at the peak. What if you bought the house in February of 2020 instead of 2022? Well, it's probably still up, or at the very least, it's flat.
Yeah, that's
So
reasonable.
you haven't suffered anything yet. Now, what's going to happen tomorrow, next month, next year? Well, you and I both know what happens because we control the simulation, right? So the Bank of Canada has their next meeting in September, I assume,
Yeah.
and they will lower either a quarter or a half, or if we're in a real big mess, a bigger number than that. The Fed has their next meeting in September. And unless there's an emergency meeting before then, they will lower probably by a quarter or a half. And is that going to make any difference? In the math, no. Like, what's the difference between 5 1/4 and 5? Well, a
So,
quarter, but yeah, not that big a deal. But you also said the other key word, sentiment. What do I believe? And so there are some people who believe, well, interest rates are coming down. That's great. Okay, why are interest rates coming down? Law of supply and demand. If somebody wants a lot of stuff, the price goes up. If somebody doesn't want the stuff, the price goes down. Well, if interest rates are dropping, then that means the demand for money is dropping. That must mean things are bad. People aren't borrowing. We're in a recession or heading into one. So it all depends what movie is playing in your brain, I guess. Are interest rates going up or down? I believe the sentiment is negative.
yeah, I would tend to agree. Sentiment is negative. I don't think I said it before the first rate hike. It's not going to make it's not going to make a lick of difference, especially as you're going into the summer market. It didn't. We've been two rate cuts since. It made no difference. September, another rate cut. What's going to happen in September? You're going to have a seasonally better market because even in a downward trending market, the fall market, you will always have 4 weeks of good absorption, let's call it. So things will sell, but I think people will mistake that the interest rates did something. I don't think they will. because sentiment is still pretty poor. Um, what I wanted to ask is last time when we spoke about this, we both made a prediction because at the time, January 2023, the market was rough, right? And it was slow. And we both thought the market's going to be at the best flat or it's going to go down. So what 2023 did, it was flat. And what 2024 is going to do, most likely, it's also going to be another flat year. Ultimately, for me, a flat year in GTA is that's basically a crash because we're used to 8 to 9% appreciation. So when you get a flat year, we've basically crashed. At least our sales numbers would support that. So my question for you is, let's say we have another 24 months of flat, basically low sales volume, prices stay relatively flat. Is that enough? Do you think that's going to translate in the homeowners index going up from the 5 to 6% into maybe double digits over the next 18 to 24 months?
Yes, I think that's exactly what will likely happen. And there's no such thing as the economy. There's individual people. So some individual people have done fantastic over the last 4 years, 4.5 years, 5 years, right? Because, oh, I don't have to go into Toronto every day. I can work from home. I don't have to pay for daycare. I don't have to pay for it's fantastic. And my pay's gone up. And then there's another group of people who got absolutely crushed. If you ran a hair salon, a small retail establishment, you were an esthetician, a massage therapist, whatever, you got crushed. So with respect to the homeowners, okay, if I bought my house at the peak, well, if I've got a variable rate mortgage, then obviously as the rates were going up, that was really damaging. And if I've managed to hold on, okay, if the rates are coming down a bit, that'll help me. But the people I worry about are the people who are going to be renewing over the next, 1 day to 18 to 24 months. And if we're talking about 5-year mortgages, they will be renewing at a higher rate. Like that's just math, right? That's not my opinion. I think, and you would know the numbers better than I do, but my understanding is there's a pretty big chunk of people who are going to be renewing over the next 18 months because that's what happens. We don't have
Yeah.
30-year fixed mortgages here in Canada that people are using. So even if prices stay stable, even if prices go up, it doesn't really matter. If your mortgage payment was $3,000 a month and now it's going to $5,000 a month, what are you going to do? Well, if you can continue to make the payments, great. But if you can't, you got to sell your house. And if you bought it at the peak and you have to sell it now, you're going to lose money. And if we're talking about just your run-of-the-mill $1 million house, which I guess is a one-bedroom condo in Toronto or something, it's not even a house. Well, if it's 20% less than what you paid for it, your entire down payment on your 95% LTV mortgage is wiped out. You might be short $100,000 or $200,000. Well, then yes, you're going to be coming in to see me because you got no choice. And as a result, yes, the homeowners bankruptcy index will go up. And that's only the people who own houses. We haven't talked about the whole pre-con thing.
Oh, pre-con, I think we don't need to beat a dead horse because that's in dire
Yes.
need of visitation. I think that one it's a given. That's why I'm not a big fan of pre-construction. But what I do want to do is I want to ask you a more personal question. At least it's a cliche question. Let's see how you answer it because I'm very interested. So currently it's trendy to, crap on Canada. It's trendy to pack up and leave, go somewhere else. Um, it's there's constantly the inevitable crash that's coming. And I guess what I'm trying to understand from somebody like yourself who's been around the block and from what you see from your vantage point, if you were starting all over again, let's say you're graduating university, you're in your early 20s, you're trying to work towards your CPA, what are you doing? Are you staying in Canada? Do you still believe in the Canadian dream, call it? What are you doing?
I guess it would depend on, I would look at all my options. Most likely I'd be staying.
So you don't think it's that bad of a place? Because the
Well,
way I'm trying to, because I think it's uh, what's the alternative is my
right. And
question.
that's the question. What's the alternative? So there's no doubt if you go to the grocery store, it is worse today than it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Like that's just a fact. And I'm not 20 years old. I'm 60 years old. So I've actually lived through cycles. I bought my first house, which was a townhouse in Unionville. You know it well. And this was in 1989. I paid $205,000 for it. Thought I was a genius because somebody in the same complex a year earlier had paid $275,000, like at the absolute peak. I ended up selling that place 7 years later for $20,000 less than I paid for it over a
Wow.
7 year period. And people hear that story and go, oh, that's impossible. No, not impossible. It happened to me. And I'm a genius, right? I'm like on your podcast. I couldn't be any smarter guy. Now, so will that happen again? Sure. But that same house that I sold for 205,000 or bought for 205 and sold for 20,000 less, I assume today, decades later, it's worth $1 million. So I think the answer to your question is, what's your time frame? So I guess if I was 22 years old and a fresh university graduate and I had no wife, no kid, no dog, no goldfish, I'd be looking everywhere. Why wouldn't you? But are things way better anywhere else? Like, I don't know if you follow the news or not, but they got this election coming up in the US. Like, good Lord, I'm glad I don't have to choose between those people. Um, I mean, I think Trump is hilarious, but I'm Canadian.
Yeah.
Doesn't affect me, you know. And it does kind of worry me that the other party is running people who've never had to go through any kind of primaries or anything like that. It just we slide you in. Like, is that better than Canada? I mean, yeah, Canada's a bit of a mess, but I assume next year or the year after we'll have an election and we'll get to pick whoever we want. So now, is the new guy going to be better than the old guy? No, they're all the same. They're all the same. But I don't worry about that. I worry about myself.
You worry about prepaying your phone bill every 2 weeks.
Exactly. I worry about things that I can control. So if you can show me a place that is way better, like there's all sorts of places that have way better weather than Canada. I understand that point. Um, Although I kind of like the changes of seasons. But like in the absence of finding a place that's way better, I think what I would do is I'd say, okay, I am going to do what I can do to control my own destiny. Now, would I be becoming a CPA today? Probably not. We're going to be replaced by AI or whatever. Would I, what would I be going into? I don't know. I'd have to give it some thought and figure that out. And if there are better opportunities somewhere, I guess that's where I would go. But I would want to make sure I had maximized whatever I was doing here before going.